begin tonight with what might just be perhaps the most breathtaking piece of news to come out of what's been a flood of case files and court papers in the Bryan Kohberger, Idaho saga. A possible answer to the burning questions that Kohberger would not answer and authorities seemingly couldn't find out. Why that house? Why those victims? Who among them, if any, were specifically marked for death? Page 3, paragraph B of a new document from the Idaho State Police describes an interview with a surviving roommate. That's what they say, a surviving roommate who, from everything we know at this point, must have been Dylan Mortensen. And I want to read it specifically for you. Sometime in the early morning hours, Redacted was awoken and opened her room door and heard a male say, quote, "It's okay, Kaylee. I'm here for you," and crying. She then shut the door a short while later. She opened her door again and saw someone approximately 5'10" tall, dressed in black, with a ski mask, standing in the kitchen. This is absolutely stunning information. According to a surviving roommate, the killer, Bryan Kohberger, used Kaylee Gonzalez's name before he ended her life. If that surviving roommate was right, he knew who Kaylee was. He knew where Kaylee lived. And it might just have been a targeted attack with Kaylee Gonzalez being the target, or at least one of the targets. Here's where I want to add some context, and it's important context. From the thousands of pages of case files that we have been reading since this crime was committed nearly 3 years ago, that surviving roommate, Dylan Mortensen, gave more than half a dozen interviews to the police after the murders. And while her story has remained really consistent, most of the answers that she gave about what she heard that night included hearing the words, "It's okay, I'm here to help you." It's okay, I'm here to help you, without Kaylee's name attached. So this is the first time we're hearing that at least one of her statements to the police included hearing the killer saying Kaylee's name. There is also this from Washington State University, where Kohberger was teaching as an assistant. He was pursuing his PhD in criminology. And we knew that he was unbelievably unpopular there. We knew that there was friction, especially with the female students and the female colleagues he had. But in these new documents that we've been able to obtain, they're still not public, but NewsNation has obtained them. In fact, Brian Enton, my colleague, who's been working doggedly on this story for the last almost 3 years, was able to get these. We're told that a criminology professor issued a stark warning to other professors and other supervisors. A warning that Bryan Kohberger might just become a predator. And again, in these documents that our Brian Enton has been able to obtain, this is what this professor says. Kohberger is smart enough that in 4 years, we will have to give him a PhD. Mark my word, I work with predators. If we give him a PhD, that's the guy that in many years, when he is a professor, we will hear he is harassing, stalking, and sexually abusing. These were words that were spoken months before the murders. But instead, I want to bring in Chris McDonough. He's the director of the Cold Case Foundation, a retired homicide detective and co-host of The Interview Room on YouTube. Chris, good to have you on the show again. I don't know what it is about hearing news like that, but it just makes me feel good in a story where I have yet to feel even an ounce of good. How true is it? How bad is it?
Yeah, so actually, the good news is the inmates apparently were waiting for him. And when he got there, they are now making his life absolutely miserable. They're utilizing the vent system. They're kicking the doors. They're taunting him. And they're basically, torturing him through, using psychology. My goodness, he's complaining. And the guards at this point, the most they can do is write it down or, tell them, hey, there's nothing we can do. You're not in physical harm.
I have so many more questions, and I'm going to ask them, but I do want to touch on that last little bit, physical harm, because as I understand it, he's in cages within his cage, meaning he's in a cell for 23 hours a day, and there's a slat for food. He gets out for an hour a day, but if he gets out, he goes into this big room in the middle, and there's usually a cage in the middle where he can be, or he can be handcuffed to one of those little desky type tables if there are other inmates who are nearby. How can people get close to his door? How could people get close to him and actually put him in physical danger, or can they?
Well, actually, there are about 32 inmates apparently in the J block currently. And within those 32 folks, they are the worst of the worst, outside of death row, of course. And he's in J block. So what that would be, that's called a special housing unit, right? An SHU. And it's really a prison within a prison. However, the disadvantage that he's at, there's not a whole bunch of room where they can start moving other inmates around. So what they want to do is keep him in protective custody right now until, he goes through the process of where do we fit this guy through the whole prison system for the rest of his life. And so he's meeting with doctors. He's going through, the systems of evaluation, and they're not going to put him into general population. But until that happens, the inmates have come up with a creative idea in harassing him to the point where it's basically driving him crazy.
So I have a question about that. How does it happen that they are all in collusion, almost creating a 24-hour schedule? Is that normal? Does this happen a lot, that prisoners will band together and say, let's get that one guy and let's all work together to do it?
I don't know if they necessarily band together outside of they knew he was coming. This was such a high-profile situation. They were aware that he was coming to, the IMAX prison up there in Kuna. And so they got together and said, okay, well, how do we harass this guy? And so my understanding is there's a couple of different ways of doing it. You can do it through the door, through the slot. The whole facility as a whole was built in 1989. So it's just one concrete echo chamber. And so they also can do it by kicking the doors. They even have folks that are called door warriors that just kick the doors to drive people crazy. And they can talk through the vents. And believe it or not, actually, one of the vents they can talk through is they remove the water out of the toilets, and they can actually talk through the toilet to another cell nearby. It's like this gigantic, acoustic chamber. But my understanding is they're using the vents currently.
When you turned that podium, and I was in the courtroom, it was like, man, it's on now. I mean, that was really a moment. I first want to ask you though, and I noticed this. I was sitting behind you guys, and I saw Christy, your wife, pull out her phone. And look sort of disturbed, and then you guys called the deputy over, and then he was looking at your phone, and I kind of figured something bad was going on, and it turns out that it was a threatening text message that she had received during the actual sentencing while the victim impact statements were going on. And I don't want to read the whole thing because I just don't want to give glory to, whoever did this, but I do want to read a little of it so people can see what exactly happened. It says, sitting near you in court and watching you is a joke. You know that Bryan is innocent. Making threats to Bryan about getting raped in prison was very silly. I am in contact with a lot of serial killers, including BTK, and I've been put in contact with a wannabe serial killer who is in Moscow, Idaho, and I have given him your address. And I don't think people realize, Steve, that this is the kind of stuff that you and your family, and I'd imagine the other victims too, I mean, you guys have been having to deal with this for some time, but during the actual sentencing, what did you make of it?
Yeah, the sentencing, there's definitely an element of crazy people that gravitate towards these type of events. That's why I've always hope that the court would use force and be very careful with all the voices that they're talking to. Like, make sure that we're holding these people accountable and, be tough on them.
So are they going to do an investigation? Again, I saw the deputy take Christie's phone. I mean, is there any way to trace and figure out who that was? I'd imagine it wasn't really someone in the courtroom. I guess it could be, but it seems like that part was probably just made up.
Yeah, I think so as well. They just wanted to piggyback right off something she had said because it was live TV or slight delay close to live TV. And it was accurate, So we did pass it on to our lawyer, and he started working with the investigators, and they're definitely going to, or if they already haven't, tracked this person down, and they'll be held accountable. Just one less crazy person on the streets that try to find a family to harass. I doubt he's not around here. I've heard that he's in another state.
Okay. Well, listen, you guys are the wrong family to try to mess with. That's for sure. And I'm glad to hear that the police are taking it seriously. But like I said, I know this is something you've been dealing with really throughout. And even now with Bryan Kohberger pleading guilty and admitting it, even now these people are still doing this. It's crazy.
Yeah, this is why part of the reason we were hard on the prosecutor, because you can't look at it any other way that by hiding those details of what happened to my daughter and the other victims, it gave fuel to these people. It gave them a wishful thinking that they were like defending a PhD grad, and a master's degree and pursuing his PhD. So, people don't want to root for like a skinhead or a cop killer or ravaged drug user. But this guy could have had a persona, and I just don't understand why Thompson would have wanted to protect him by hiding these details. And I know some of the other families have already changed their opinion of the deal, knowing all the facts that have came out. So I think it's suspicious that he purposely never let this information out.
I spoke with Olivia yesterday, your daughter, and your victim impact statement was obviously really just intense, and hers was intense, and both are getting a lot of attention. I think have really sort of inspired the world in a way. She told me that she felt relieved after the hearing, that she actually did feel just a little better in general. Did you feel the same way? I mean, how are you doing now?
Yeah, to be honest, I felt great because I felt like the first time the courtroom had a representation that was in harmony of our family. We're not going to sit there and honor a mass murderer and say that he can sit on his butt because he was honorable to the sword. He was honorable to the judge. Of course, he's going to be honorable to the judge. The judge is going to decide if he lives or dies, but he wasn't honorable to us. And that's, if you're not there for the victims, then what's the reason at the courtroom, So for the first time, we set the tone, and we wanted to have some power in that courtroom and dictate some things to him. So then he was just sitting there getting railed on.
Dr. Michelle Dupree, a former medical examiner, retired forensic pathologist, and former law enforcement officer who's been poring over these documents with the rest of us. Dr. Dupree, it's nice to see you. Appreciate you coming on tonight. First of all, I want to ask you about this new information that we just got from Steve Gonsalves in Ashley's podcast, where he talked about a rounded object with stripes, thinking that may have been a second weapon used. What do you make of that?
I think it could be a couple of things. I guess it's possible that it could be something like brass knuckles. It could also be, if the knife was still in the sheath, sort of a rounded or banded handle on the sheath of the knife. And if it was there and he took that to strike her on the mouth, it may be something like that. Or it could be an entirely different object. But it does sound like it is not just the knife itself.
Was there any evidence that you saw that shows, and this is what we've heard for a while, that the victims tried to fight back?
Definitely, Xana did. We know that most of her injuries were defensive wounds, and she was stabbed the most 50 or more times. I don't see anything that is actually described in the reports of defensive injuries on the other students that were there, but there may have been some. It just may not be in the report that I read.
I mean, stabbed 50 or more times, Dr. Dupree, and that's just one of them. I'm just thinking about the energy that would take. I mean, have you ever seen a case like this where 4 people were killed that quickly, that many stab wounds? It's just sort of hard to wrap your mind around how it all went down.
I have not seen a case quite like this. I've had many stab wound cases, but not so many times and not with so many people in such close proximity. So this was what I would call almost a blitz attack, where he came in, he did this very quickly. He was obviously filled with a lot of rage. There was a lot of force, a lot of anger, and this happened very quickly.
Do you think there was anything that could have been done to save these kids? I mean, if in some way help had been there right away, or do you think it was just so brutal and he made sure to just, you know, finish the job basically?
I think it was so fast. I think it was so brutal. I don't really think that if anything had been called in earlier, I don't think it would have helped. I think he was too much rage, too fast, and too determined to kill these 4 people.
And just back to all of the stab wounds, I just think about the exertion that would take, Dr. Dupree. I mean, wouldn't he have just been exhausted? I mean, do you think that's why he left and why there are survivors here? Because it seems like to do that, it would take a lot out of you.
Absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right. I think he was on such a high adrenaline rush, or whatever he may have been on, that he was so enraged that once this was done, he would actually come down and crash, but not necessarily immediately. He may still have been on this adrenaline high until he went someplace else and finally calmed down. But yes, he would be very tired after this.
And what Steve said in that interview with Ashley about the, I think he said the blood pooling in the stomach, I think is what he said, and that's how they know that she sat up. They can actually, I guess they can figure that stuff out during the autopsy?
Well, yes, from the scene itself and from the autopsy. We look at the scene to see what, if the blood is coagulated or dried or not. And then once, of course, we do the autopsy, we can tell a lot more.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Well, Dr. Dupree, we appreciate you coming on with us tonight. Nice to see you again.
You've been learning a lot more about how all 4 of these kids died. Can you take me through it?
Yeah, I mean, what an emotional day. And then all of a sudden the document dump began. They didn't waste any time. Moscow police has been releasing all sorts of documents. We've got a team frantically going through them. You mentioned the autopsy reports. Let's start there. I'm going to read through these, and it's difficult to talk about. I mean, like what you just said about Kaylee and how many times they were stabbed. It's awful. But let me read you through what we know. I'll start with Ethan Chapin. This is from his autopsy report. Fatal stab wound under left clavicle, severed his subclavin vein and subclavin artery, jugular vein severed, only had sharp force injuries, wounds caused by sharp object like knife. Xanacronodal, 1 laceration on her right lung, 2 lacerations in her heart. She had 50+ stab wounds, mostly defensive. So we knew that Kaylee fought back, but now 50+ stab wounds, mostly defensive with Xana. Only had sharp force injuries. Madison Mogan, left lung laceration, liver laceration, only had sharp force injuries. And then Kaylee Gonzalez, there was a left lung laceration, a liver laceration. Think about what was going on here. 2 subdural bleeds, stab behind her clavicle, cut her subclavicle vein and artery, sharp force injuries, asphyxial injuries, so, suffocated, blunt force injuries. This is kind of where the question about the second weapon has come in. And then 20+ stab wounds on Kaylee Gonzalez.
Yeah, well, Bryan, that might make a little more sense as to why we're learning also that some of the colleagues at Washington State University said they saw Bryan Kohberger with injuries on his knuckles and scratch marks, what seemed like scratch marks on his face. So this makes a lot more sense. There was a pitched fight at least on the third floor, and it appeared on the second floor as well with Xana. I also have not seen anything yet, and I just want to correct some of the reporting that's out there. I have not seen any reporting that there was carving into, Ethan Chapin's leg. That was something that made a huge headline, and it was very distressing to hear it. It just says these sharp injuries, but who knows if we'll see more. Can I ask you also about the neighbor and Bethany, both telling the police about a strange explosive sound, like a firework. What can you tell us about that?
That's about all we know. And it's the first, there's little things that we've heard here and there. I have never heard this before until this came out in the documents that that Bethany and the neighbor both heard something that sounded like a firework. I've been trying to think of what that is. You might have a better idea than me. I have no idea. Maybe something from the car speeding away. That's the best that I could think of.
Or something fell over in the house on a hard surface and it sounded like it broke. I mean, it is a really tough one to put together, but they both heard it. A neighbor heard it and Bethany heard it. Okay, the other information that Kohberger's job looked like it was in trouble. They had some screenshots. The police officers had screenshots from text messages between two of the Washington State University professors.
Yeah, and we had heard rumblings that he had issues, obviously, when he was the TA there, and issues with students and other professors, and he, wasn't keeping his job. I want to read you this text message, though. This is what we never seen this before. This is one professor writing this to another professor. We need to do an intervention with Kohberger. She is going to try to gather information, but apparently he's offended several of our female students, which again goes back to some of our reporting from early on when we were at the school talking to people, that he had issues with the female students.
Right, and also in those documents, apparently a female student at his college, WSU, said that she saw photos of herself and of her friends on his phone on the Dateline documentary. So they didn't even know that they were on his phone until they saw the Dateline documentary. But she says she said Bryan Kohberger used to sit close to her in class when he showed up for class, often late. Let me move to the stalking issue, because we all assumed that the investigators would tell us that Bryan Kohberger stalked one or more of these kids at 1122 King Road, but it turns out he just might be bizarre. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. There's reports that there were people in the woods, that the kids at 1122 saw strange figures in the woods, that Murphy the dog would go running to the woods and wouldn't come back quite often. But then there's this discussion about a woman who talked to the police about being matched with Kohberger on Tinder.
Yeah, and this was kind of crazy. You're right, though. We don't have any proof from police that he was stalking them. He may have been, but the police never had any evidence. We asked specifically about that today. But this is the woman who matched with him on Tinder, and I'm going to read this because I want to get it right. She says that she was talking about horror movies with Kohberger. He asked her what she thought would be the worst way to die, and she said with a knife. And then Kohberger asked her to do something to the effect of, he said something like a K-bar, which we all know what that means. I mean, K-bar knife is the knife he used to kill these 4 kids, the knife sheath they found in the house. She said she didn't know what that was. She had to Google it. She stopped talking to him because he weirded her out, which, yeah, I mean, I think that would weird anybody out. And I can only imagine what she's thinking now, knowing all the details of everything that went down.
Well, and honestly, who knows? Who knows if he stalked her, if he was thinking about her as a target before he ultimately chose these kids at 1122 King. There was also some investigation that went on at the Latah County Jail. They started asking other inmates there questions about their fellow inmate. And a guy who I guess had one of the cells close by in Latah, from August 24 to September 24, he had some observations. What did the police officers reveal today about that?
Yeah, so the inmate said that Kohberger, and I'm going to read this again because this is from the police report, said that Kohberger was the smartest person he encountered in jail, but that he became annoying. Kohberger would wash his hands dozens of times a day. You know, he was a germaphobe, so that's not a shock. Spend an hour in the shower. Said Kohberger would be up all night. He could hear Kohberger moving around at night, and says that Kohberger would take a nap during the day. And, you know, it's interesting that they went back and talked to some of these inmates, because when I was in the prison yesterday, you mentioned at the top of the show, they've now moved Kohberger into the Idaho prison system. What they told me yesterday is they are going to go through all of the electronic communications of prisoners in the system that he may be around to see who has been talking about him. And that's how they're going to determine what block he may go into, even though he's likely going to be in isolation, which I found very interesting. They can actually search through all of the communication that the prisoners have been having with family and such and see who seems to be the most interested in Kohberger.
So fascinating. And we learned today that all of the conversations that Bryan Kohberger had on his tablets and phones in both Ada County and Latah County, it's up to the sheriffs in those two counties as to whether they will release those communications to the public. We're hoping maybe they will, but that's in the future.